Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 107 at Streets and Eats. And today on the podcast, we are taking you to France, where one of our favorite pastimes is wine tasting.
And buying and drinking.
Yeah.
And some more tasting.
And just looking at the fields and
everything to do with wine. That's right.
Welcome to Streets and Eats, the travel and food podcast dedicated to taking our listeners to the sights, sounds, and flavors of fascinating places near and far, both on and off the beaten path. We're Jim and Corinne Vale, and we've been traveling internationally and domestically together for decades, visiting more than 90 countries in all 50 states in the USA. We'll share all of the local knowledge and food expertise we've gathered through years of living as expats in Asia and Europe, as well as traveling with families spanning multiple generations around the world. Join us each week for a new adventure.
So today, Jim is going to ask me a trivia question. Yeah. And I'm here to tell you, I am not that knowledgeable about wine. So this is going to be fun.
Well, yeah, that's a caveat for this whole episode. Neither one of us are wine experts.
We're not, we are connoisseurs in that we love it.
We know what we like.
But we don't really, we're
not sommeliers. We have had a lesson in tasting, but we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that.
Let's get to the question. Okay. So I try to stay away from these questions that are just like
easy
numbers type thing. But for this one, I thought it was kind of appropriate. It's a two-parter.
Sweet.
So we'll go with the first one first. Of course. All right.
Bien sûr.
How many bottles of wine are produced in France in a year?
I don't know how many are produced in France, but I do know it's the largest exporter of wines.
Maybe. That didn't come up in my search.
Came up in one of my searches. I'm going to say it's got to be in the millions. It's got to be in the millions. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 24 million.
You would be off. You need to add 3 zeros.
3 zeros?
Well,
billion?
Yeah, but not 24 billion. More like
2.4 billion?
4 to 8 billion bottles of wine.
Well, anyway.
They measure it in hectoliters. Do you know what a hecto is?
It's a lot. Is that the second part of the question?
No.
Well, hecta means 8?
No.
Hecta means 20?
100.
Oh, hecta means 100?
So they measure it in hectoliters,
idea.
Which threw me for a loop at first. But a hectoliter is 100 liters of wine.
Oh, in case you're wondering,
or whatever.
Just want you to know, pairing. We're pairing our wine with our podcast. You should too. Go pour yourself.
Choice. Smooth, creamy finish. Anyway.
Creamy finish.
I don't know what that means.
I don't either. Never heard that before.
All right. Well, part 2. Okay, so first of all, 6 to 8 billion bottles of wine are produced each year. How many bottles of wine are exported each year?
Well, 10,000 bottles.
Whoa.
10 million bottles.
I guess what I'm getting into is how many bottles are drank each year. But so you can do the export. Subtract that.
I don't even really know what the question is.
How many bottles of wine are exported? And it's about 2 billion.
So they keep 8 billion.
That leaves 4 to 6 billion bottles of wine.
Just for those French to drink.
Now, they don't drink every bottle that they produce every year. Some of it is meant to sit on a shelf for a while. But for every one they put on a shelf to age, one's being taken off the shelf to be drank from a previous year. So I think it's pretty safe a safe bet that at least 3 billion bottles of wine are being drank in France each year.
I mean, you can tell that just by walking down the streets of Paris. Well, that brings me to an idiom that I just read, and I don't remember the French. Je m'excuse.
That's okay. I don't speak French.
But basically it says, when you draw the wine, you must drink it. Because it harkens back to before bottles. And, if you're going to actually pour the wine out of a barrel, then
put it in
of course you're going to drink it. You're not going to waste it.
That makes sense.
But did you know that in Roman times, a couple of facts about that, because the Romans brought grapes to
everybody
Europe.
Except Georgians.
Including France and Germany. And according to Roman times, you were only supposed to drink wine to quench your thirst.
Oh, not to get drunk.
Not to get drunk. And women weren't allowed to drink wine. Now, that's not fair. But that's supposedly what the Romans said.
Well, and part of the main points of wine during Roman times was it was a safe way to drink water. So they would mix water with the wine and you could drink it, and it was safer to drink.
Another fun fact. How much water is in wine?
Oh, without adding it, just from the juice.
No, I mean, a glass, a bottle of wine.
How much water is in this wine?
How much wine? How much percentage?
How much have you drank?
Right. I'm making this stuff up. No, I'm not.
What percentage of wine is water?
It's water. I mean, think about it. The human body. We always ask that question.
98% or something like that.
But that's not necessarily the same.
I'm going to
just
say
saying it's a question.
I mean, it's all liquid, of course.
It's liquid. That's a start.
So, but it's not 100% because there's alcohol in it. There's the
fruits in it.
Fruit, the juice. 98%.
85 to 90%.
Oh, wow.
So
that's pretty close.
A lot of it is just water, tasty water, but water all the same. Well, that's enough of our trivia / facts / fun. Well, hopefully not fun.
Well,
we'll have a lot more fun. Okay. Where do we start? Okay. So we started already by telling you that we are not, by any stretch of anyone's imagination, a wine expert. We're certainly not French wine experts, and we're not even close.
So if you're coming here for expertise in actual, like how to determine the different flavors in the wine, the different notes and that sort of thing,
that's not really
going to be that helpful. Well, but if you are planning on a trip to France and you'd like to do some wine tasting while you're there, we have done that quite a bit. We do have experience with that. And because that can be kind of like intimidating I think, at first, just to walk into a place off the street and say, I'd like to taste your wine. So yeah, that's really what we're going to be talking about.
Exactly.
The process of walking off the street and tasting wine.
And the experience all around, because it is an experience. I think that French wine in general, is synonymous with France because it is so integrated. It is so integral to their society, to their culture. It's just, wine is France. France is wine. It just is.
Well, for instance, we were talking to the vintner in one of the places where we were doing a tasting, and one of the stories he was telling us was that he had his first glass of wine at 5 years old.
He said 4 or 5.
4 or 5. And that was just sitting around with the family, telling stories and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that gives you an idea about how integral wine is to the French culture and society.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so how do you start? You're coming to France. You're taking a trip. Maybe you just live next door in Germany, like we do, but it doesn't really matter. You're going to France, and you want to try some French wine because that's what you do.
To France.
But it can be a little intimidating because you're not going to walk into a store and just say, I want, that bottle, because we don't know anything about it. And as Jim mentioned, they only make billions of bottles, which in that are
didn't even look up the number of different varieties
and everything. I mean, it can be mind-boggling. So what you can do is you can taste the wines. And so the word for that in French is dégustation. And you will see that word all over
any wine region. For sure.
I mean, we were in the Loire. We were in, Burgundy. We were in, you name it, you will see it. And it's exactly what it is you can just stop in and taste the wines. Nowadays we have this wonderful thing called Google Maps where you can look on it and you can see what the hours are and maybe more information, what it looks like inside.
And it may or may not be accurate. Because in many cases, these are small farmers that are producing their wine. And just because there's hours in Google doesn't mean that matches up with what they're doing currently during the growing season or the harvesting season or the winemaking season.
Because it is, I mean, it's very dependent on what their job is for the day.
But it's a good start.
Varies. At any rate, it doesn't really matter if you have that or not. We've been wine tasting long before Google. So
yeah,
it's not a big deal. At any rate, how do you get started? So let's say that you go to the Loire Valley, for example.
Like what does a typical
maybe that's
walking in look like?
That's probably where we really started tasting wine, is the Loire Valley ourselves.
Sure, yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, we've
been
tasted
to wineries
it before,
but we never really did wine tasting at a winery other than, you take a tour and they give you a glass at the end or something like that.
Well, we definitely, when we were in Loire, we rented a gîte, basically an Airbnb for the week. It was the cutest thing, little white cottage. Beautiful fireplace.
Beautiful.
Just gorgeous area in general. And it was in spring, so all the flowers were blue. It was just gorgeous. And we discovered on that trip something that we've done forevermore. And that's how we like to figure out where we want to go.
Yeah. Well, when you go out to lunch, you're very likely to have wine with lunch. And a French lunch, we're not talking like stopping at McDonald's on the road and get a burger and then hit the road again.
And we're not even really talking about stopping at a restaurant, ordering a dish, eating it and leaving. That is not a French lunch.
A French lunch is multi-course, maybe one or two different wine pairings with it. And you're going to be there for 2 hours. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit longer, just depending. But during those lunches, you have a great opportunity to taste wine. Now, you can't do a wine tasting in most places where they're going to bring you small sips to try of different wines.
In the restaurants, you mean?
Right.
Right.
But what you can do is, as you're ordering your food, you ask your waiter, can they recommend a wine to go with what you're eating? And
I personally recommend that way of doing it. Unless you know a lot more about wine than we do. They're going to have the wines from that region, from right close by, those towns that are nearby. So that's how you know that they're going to be fresh and local. But you don't know what they are. There's too many to know them all.
There really are. And so you ask the waiter, which one do you like? Which one do you prefer? And what would go best with what we're eating? And they'll always, can't think of any situation where they would not, in our case anyway, make a recommendation and go with it.
By the way, maybe we have gray hair now, but we've been doing this
for a while.
For a long time. We didn't have gray hair. We didn't look like this, mature travelers back in the day. We were young. We were in our 20s and our 30s. So you could tell that we might be novices. Now you might think we know more about it. We don't, but we might look like.
In some regions, we have a pretty good idea what to order. But for the idea of wine tasting, that's a good way to start. In a restaurant, get a recommendation, try it. Now, what we do, if we like that wine, which almost invariably we do, we'll take a picture of the label.
And they're ready for that.
Yeah.
They will gladly hold up the bottle. They will even give you directions to the domain.
They know, for sure. We've had that happen a couple of times. You get a picture of the label, and it's got the vintner, and on the back, it usually has an address. So you get that picture as well, because you're not going to remember after having some wine at lunch. And if you're the driver,
you want to take a nap,
you only get like one small glass and maybe a sips of the other different wines that come, just so you can taste them, because you don't want to drink and drive. And then after lunch, around 2:30, because
3:00,
most things are not open in France between 11 and 2:30, except for the restaurants. So a little bit later in the afternoon, you go out, you drive around the vineyards, you find that vintner, and you pop on in. Now, it may be there's a doorbell you have to ring, or a door you need to knock on, or you might just be walking right into the wine producing room, where there's a little table, a little kiosk, and someone will be there to greet you.
Or they might not. So you just sort of hang out until someone shows up.
Right.
Because they're there. And they'll probably have noticed your car pulling in. But that doesn't mean they can necessarily drop what they're doing right then. So I can remember one time we pulled into this beautiful estate. I mean, I was taking pictures left and right. It was just stunningly gorgeous. And I think we were there a good 20 minutes. And we were probably on the brink of leaving because we were like, maybe, it's just not a good time. But before we could leave, I mean, it was like magic. They knew we were just about to get in the car. They came running out and said, oh, yeah, bonjour.
Please come taste our wine.
Let's try some wines. And then we were there, of course, for another, 30, 45 minutes or whatever.
And everywhere we've gone where was that situation where we asked during lunch, we found a wine that we liked. We went out to the vendor. Everywhere we've gone, when we relate that story to them, they love it. They love hearing that their wine was in the restaurant and that someone ordered it and that you loved it so much that you came out there. So it's like a really good
segue,
like icebreaker
to
get them talking and just to have a really good time. And they'll pour some wine, let you taste it. We'll talk a little bit about different wines and the order you should taste wines and things like that. But
they're there to help you.
So that's the first way. Go to the restaurant, get a recommendation, go to that winery. That's a really good way to do it.
That is.
It's not the way you're going to always do it. Sometimes,
you're not going to perhaps have that big a lunch every day.
Every day.
You're going to be out doing other things. And it depends on where you are and where your goal is for the day and everything. As you know, we just came back from the Alsace region, and there it is just vintner after vintner after vintner. As
every
you walk
village.
Through any village, you will see, I don't even know, a minimum of 6, minimum of 10. They're just everywhere. I mean, and you can look around the alley and there's a door, and almost always they'll have a sign that says who they are, what the company's name is, and degustation. And sometimes they'll have hours posted, and sometimes they don't. And you just sort of wander in.
The door's open, and sometimes it's not, but there's a bell to ring, and don't be afraid to ring that bell. And that's really what I like about Alsatian wine tasting is you go into these villages and you don't have to like drive out into the countryside to find the winery. They're all centered in a village. Well, most of them are.
I was going to say some are out in the vineyard still. Other areas, it definitely, like when we were in Loire, and what's the one that we were in down at the bottom?
Oh, yeah. Languedoc.
Yeah. Languedoc-Roussillon.
Right.
When we were down there.
Long name. That's what I remember.
We pretty much had to go out into the vineyards each time to find the domain. And they were there and they were waiting. It was still, even though it wasn't in the town, they were still ready to receive you pretty much everywhere you were.
Yeah. So you can find them that way. But that's what I was saying about Alsace. I really like it that you can walk through, like Kinsheim, for instance, small village. Most of that village is devoted to making wine. And there's, I think, 3 or 4 different winemakers in the village itself. And so what you're doing is you're walking into like their tractor garage where they will drive their tractor out to the fields and work in the fields all day and then come back. That's also where they'll do their wine tasting. And there'll be a little counter in there. And so you kind of get to see not just the wine, but a little bit of like what daily life is for the farmers in that area, which I think is really cool.
It's all very cool.
Another option you have is just to go into a store that has wine tasting. And
a lot of the stores will have wine tastings, and then some don't. So don't expect them to have it.
Yeah. They'll say on the outside if they have wine tasting.
Yeah.
And some of them are just stores for wine tasting from a particular winery where it's not attached to the winery at all. It's just a store on the road, and you go in, they have all the wine that they produce there. You're not going to get like a tour of the caves or anything like that because they're not there.
And you're not going to get a whole lot of personal story.
Yeah, it's more of
which for me is like, of course, one of the main reasons I love doing it.
More of a retail operation type thing.
Yeah.
But it is a good way to taste wine. If you want a particular wine and that winery doesn't have an on-site tasting room. So sometimes it's the only way you can taste some people's wine.
Well, we were just in Tann.
And they'll almost always charge until you buy a certain amount, and then the wine tasting was free.
And some of the vintners actually do that nowadays too.
That's true too.
Because I think that they've been taken advantage of, that people will come in and they just taste wine and they don't buy anything. So I think kind of a rule of thumb is if you're going to go in and you want a free wine tasting, know that you should buy 3 bottles of wine to sort of pay your dues kind of thing. Otherwise, I mean, it's not a big deal to pay for it. It's usually like €8 for
6 to 8 euros.
Whatever. That's not that much, and that's fine. And
you're going to get
welcome
plenty
to
of
do
wine
that.
out of that 6 to 8 euros. I mean, not like you're going there to get drunk or anything, but
you
you'll
could
definitely taste a lot of wine for that.
Yeah. So it used to be, I mean, I think I just saw them starting to charge maybe a few years ago. But I think it's more popular. I think there's more tourists. I think COVID made a difference. Just everything has changed, as we know, in the last, 5 years of traveling.
Yeah.
And that's one of the changes, is that a lot of the vintners now will charge you if you don't buy. However, I am here to tell you, I have never, I think, I'm not lying, I've never walked into a French vintner, tried the wines, and not wanted to buy some.
It's true. It's true.
I've never done that.
It's hard to not find something you like.
Yeah, they always have. I mean, they usually have, I don't know, anywhere from 6 to 12 different varieties. And again, they'll tell you the story about each wine and the history of their winery and this particular wine, and something about their family. I mean, they're just so personable. Of course, that's all dependent on how busy they are, what the season is,
and how much English they speak.
Although I've never run into someone who doesn't speak English. I'm here to tell you that whole.
Even the last place we went tasting, we found this really interesting grape variety. I can't remember the name of it right now. Yes, I can. It's the Clavener. Yeah. Which we really liked during lunch. So we went to the winery, and the lady there says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak very much English," but she still had a great time. We still had a great time talking and getting stories from her. Well, she did talk to us a
lot in German, in all fairness.
Yeah, so that's true. Between French and German and a little bit of English that she had, we were able to really have a good time, even though at first she was a little reluctant to engage, I think.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Okay, so you might have to pay, but you're more than welcome to basically walk into just about any domain, any vintner, and try the wines. And you don't have to have reservations, and you don't have to even really know what you like much before you get there. They're very patient. They're very good at telling you. They are the experts. They will tell you what each and every wine is made up from, how long ago it was picked, how long it was fermented, what kind of cask was it, a regular cask, was it an oaking cask? I mean,
as well as like, is it a dry, sweet, medium dry, medium sweet?
What to eat with it,
that sort of thing. They'll know all of that.
They'll know everything. And they don't mind sharing at all.
Right.
They like to talk about their wine.
Okay, so we did say that you're going to go in, not necessarily with the idea of just drinking wine and getting a good buzz on.
Which you will do that too.
You will, if you're not careful. And if you're the driver, then don't. You can still taste as the driver, but you have to be very careful and really just do sips. And
all the areas that have vineyards have very small roads.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, you really want to
impaired.
you don't want to drive.
For sure.
Impaired.
So they'll guide you through as you go in. So you don't really need to worry too much. And we've never been treated like anything but friendly, welcomed. None of this snootiness that you might associate with wine.
I mean, I did. That's why I was intimidated at first, because I really feel like I don't know anything about it. And I kind of get that feeling a little bit each time anew when I go into a place. I'm like, oh, what is he going to ask me?
Even though we've learned quite a bit.
Even though we know they're going to be friendly. Even though we know that they're going to explain it. And they have seen all kinds of people. And even the French are asking the same questions. We were there with a couple the other day.
That's true.
And they were asking just as many questions as we were. So I felt
a little bit justified. Yeah. So they'll guide you through the whole process of trying their wines. If you're the vintner, you're only going to try their wines. So you're not going to try other wines.
That's right.
If you're at a store, you might have an option to try different wines. So you might try a couple of different Rieslings or a couple of different Sylvaners from different winemakers. But the general idea is you're going to be trying their wines, and they'll guide you through the best way to do that, which is, generally speaking, the driest wine to the sweetest wine with the whites, And then if they have reds, switching to the reds, and the same thing, driest to sweetest.
Well, and it depends on the area that you're at. Like the Loire and the Alsace are more known for white wines.
White, that's for sure.
Whereas Burgundy and what's the name of that place again? Languedoc-Roussillon.
We're more red.
Those are all more reds. So you're going to know that because when you look at their menu of offers, they're going to have 1 or 2 whites maybe, and then 10 reds or some rosés in there, probably mixed in, which they will call like a cuvée. You can always read cuvée on there, which is a mixture usually
a
of
mix.
a red and white wine, with some exceptions we found out. You always find out something new. It's amazing.
Always.
And they're very good. It's not like they're pushing one type of wine. In fact, we went in to this Clavener place that Jim was talking about with the idea that we wanted the wine we drank because we
For
liked
lunch.
it. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? They'd run out of that wine.
They'd sold out.
They had sold out they had sold it some to the restaurant and that was it. So we didn't get to buy that wine and that was a little disappointing. But of course, they had 8 other wines for us to try. And yes, we walked home with a case of wine, which in France,
half case, 3 bottles.
in France, the smallest case is 3 bottles. And then you have 6 bottles. And they'll sell you as much as you want. And the other thing is, if you're traveling from the States or other countries, they will ship.
Yeah, you'll have to pay tax on it.
Yeah. But you can still get it. It's not like you have to worry about transporting it yourself. If you're really into it, which we've become more and more into it, you can get your wine and you don't have to worry about it.
You can bring it home in your checked baggage. I think, I don't know what the current limits are, but I'll just give you a ballpark.
2 liters.
I believe it's 2 liters or 3 bottles of wine. I think you can do 3 bottles of wine per person.
It doesn't really matter. You
We'll
don't
look it
have
up
to
and
do
we'll put it
that.
in the notes.
And the thing is, you can't put it in your carry-on. You used to be able to put it in your carry-on.
Can't put it on your carry-on.
So that means you have to worry about breakage. But you can do it. We've done it.
They're pretty sturdy bottles. Okay, so you're tasting driest to sweetest. Maybe you don't want to try every single one of their white wines, for instance. What you should do is ask the person that's helping you, what is your winery known for? What is the wine that people really want from your winery?
What is your signature wine?
Yeah, your signature wine. And they'll be happy to share that information with you and tell you all about it. You definitely want to give that one a try. But then also another question, just like in a restaurant, what is your favorite wine from the winery? Because it may not be the same one. And that way, that'll give you at least 2 different wines to taste and try. And most people will have, like in the Alsace region, you really like the Rieslings, and other people might really like the Cremant. So you're going to want to try those specifically. And that's okay too.
Well, and if you don't really even have a clue at all, they're going to ask you, do you think you like sweet? Do you like fruity? Do you like dry? When do you want to drink your wine? Are you having it with dinner? Will it be an aperitif? Will it be a dessert wine? Will you have it with cheese? After a quick jog, we ran into that one time. And no, I'm never drinking my wine after a quick jog, mainly because, hey, I don't jog.
Maybe during the podcast.
Maybe during a podcast. Maybe. Anyway, they will lead you through it. I've never had to worry about it. Sometimes I've just walked in kind of like, well, and they do all the hard work.
They do.
And it's always been fun.
Okay, now a little bit more about the process, right? I always thought, and I don't know where I got this from, that you don't really drink the wine. You take it in your mouth, you swish it around, and then you spit it out somewhere.
And I think you do, like in the States, you do that.
In some places
and maybe
they do
some
that.
other places, not so much in France.
No. They'll pour you, I guess,
About that much,
about a
probably.
finger of wine in a glass, maybe a little bit more. They're usually pretty generous pours, but you're not going to get a full glass. But it's usually more than a sip. Now, as the driver, I would just have a sip. You're not expected to drink it all, for sure. They don't bat an eye at all when you take the excess wine to get ready for your next tasting and pour it into, there'll be a little container somewhere for collecting the wine that doesn't get drank. They also won't care if you drink the whole little glass that they pour you. So I think that's one of the intimidating factors is, well, what do you do? Do you spit it out? What? Right.
And sometimes they'll just give you a new glass. I feel sorry for the people washing all those glasses.
Usually if you're going whites and then reds,
they'll switch.
Dry to sweet, you'll keep one glass for the whites and then switch to a different glass for the reds.
It really has varied literally from vintner to vintner to vintner. Every experience we've ever done, we've done a few, completely different.
Yeah.
Completely different.
But
all fun.
But they've all had a place where you could dump the excess wine. You never expected to drink it all. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, how to do it.
What, where, and how.
Where, and how.
And one last thing I want to say about that is, we just came back from Alsace, which we've been to many times, but I always do more research when I go someplace. And one of the things I wanted to research was, on this last trip, what are some domains that they suggest that you go to?
Oh.
They meaning like tourist people or whatever. Okay. Wrong. Rabbit hole. No.
Everybody's got one they're going to recommend.
Well, no, not one. That was the problem. 50. It's like there's
too many.
way that it was overwhelming just reading the website. So don't do that. So don't try to figure it out. Go to the restaurant, decide if you like the wine, go there. Walk down the street, look at this cute little place, walk in and try them. Drive down the road. Oh, look, they have degustation. They have a tasting. Hey, let's stop. Try it there. I'm here to tell you, you will enjoy that so much.
You can also ask.
Don't do a whole lot of research.
You can also ask the hotelier at your hotel for ideas on where to go, and they'll give you some good ideas too, because everybody has their wine that they like.
The thing you have to be careful of, and I think that in some of the more popular towns, especially, or cities that are known for wine, what you need to really be careful of is not getting trapped into a very commercial, you have to go to blah, 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 because that's what all Americans like. Well, you don't necessarily want to do what
I agree.
Blah, blah, blah is. You want to find your own.
I like the small ones.
That's where I think the experience really plays into it.
I think so. Okay, so my favorite one is trying it in the restaurant and then finding that winery. My second favorite way to do it, a wine tasting, is you're in a hotel in a small town, like Kientzheim, for instance. We keep talking about. It's like one of our favorite little villages.
All of these little villages.
And you just wander through the town and find the vintners that are in that town and do wine tastings in the town. You don't have to worry about driving that way because you can walk back to your hotel. You don't have to worry about whether you have to spit out the wine or dump the wine. You can taste as much as you like.
I will say, here's a kind of 180-degree turn to how we would find restaurants. When we're looking for restaurants, we want to find a restaurant that's busy. You want high turnover. You want to see lots of locals in there. When I'm looking for wineries and vintners, I kind of want almost the more obscure, the more less visited the possible. If it's going to be right smack dab in the middle of town, it's got a big sign and, all kinds of like playground, or I don't even know what else they'd put out there. But one where, you're going to constantly have tour buses and things like I don't want to go there. They probably have great wine. Don't get me wrong. And you probably would enjoy the wine. So you can go there. But for me, I always find that I'm going to have a better experience when it's just me or maybe one other couple or maybe two other couples, but a very small group of people versus, a busload. Because obviously they don't have the time to chat with you when they've got 30 people waiting on them.
And those places do exist.
Exactly. So
and we tend to avoid them, like you said. So
that's what I'm saying. For restaurants, it's a little opposite it is to vintners because you don't have to worry about turnover.
Yeah. Okay. So I just thought of one more opportunity or one more way you can do a wine tasting in France. Besides the ones we've talked about already, you can do a festival.
Yes,
where
that's right.
The vintners will all come to one place and you can try it at the festival. That's a really good way to do it too. One of the best ones is in Strasbourg, and it is a festival of independent wine growers. So they're not the big factory growers. They're all independent farmers, and they bring some of their samples to this, like a big hall, and everyone is set up in this big hall. There are hundreds of them, and you get a little wine glass at the beginning that you pay for and you can keep, or you can turn it back in and get your money back. And You just go around to the different ones and talk to them and chat
I
to them.
think they do charge you there.
Yeah, to get in, I think.
I think they charge you to get in, but don't they also charge you at the vintners?
No,
at the stalls?
No.
I think
when
some
we
do.
went.
I think some do and some don't.
Yeah, maybe the ones that have a lot more to try.
I mean, it's just very different. And if you are paying for it, remember, you're getting your money's worth regardless.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a problem.
At a wine festival, they've got booths set up and they're selling glasses of wine. You can ask for a taste of wine and oftentimes get it, but you may or may not. But the idea is there you're trying the different wines by the glass.
If you're going to a wine region in France, especially in late spring to summer, up into fall probably, look for, this is kind of a new trend, is they do these hikes through the vineyards with tasting tents along the way. Oh my gosh.
That's a great way to do a wine tasting as well.
And really, there's not usually a whole lot of tourists there. It's usually people from the area or, other French people that have come in from different regions or something, or other Germans or whatever. But that's a fun thing to do. So you might want to ask your hotel when you're there. Is there any kind of event?
Wine march.
Like a wine walk happening in any of the vineyards? And they'll know about it if there is. And that would be well worth your time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun. Okay. So we figured we'd finish the podcast this
Couple
week.
stories.
It's a little bit different, I know, than what to do here and what to do there. But it's some of the stories that we've run into, some of our favorite kind of memories as we've been wine tasting that kind of give you a little bit more of a taste.
Okay. One of my first memories from wine tasting was probably in my early 20s. And we were on a trip with a group of other people in Orange, France.
South of France.
Kind of a work trip type thing. And one of the things we did outside of work was we took a tour to some different sites and we stopped at a winery on the way back.
Because you're always going to stop at a winery.
We're all a bunch of 20-somethings. None of us knew anything about wine. We got this great tour of the whole winery, and then they took us down into
these tunnels of caves, like way underground.
When they call them caves, oftentimes they really are caves,
right?
And the tasting was, the tasting quickly turned into a bunch of 20-something-year-olds just drinking wine, which was not a pretty sight later, but. That's one of the funniest ones I remember.
Well,
and we all came away from that completely buzzed. And one of the things we noticed there was locals were coming in with plastic jugs and just buying wine straight from the barrel that they would put in a 1 liter jug or a 2 liter jug to take home. So we're like, well, we could do that. So we're like dumping out Coke bottles and water bottles, and we're filling those up for the bus ride home. That was kind of a messy bus ride home, I will admit. So
it was fun.
It was fun.
And it was a group thing versus a personal thing. So that was fun.
What is your favorite wine tasting story?
My favorite wine tasting story. Okay. So Jim was just telling me about going to Strasbourg to the Vigneron Festival. And we did that with some friends of ours whom we've traveled extensively with, well over 25 countries with. So we really sort of gel with these people.
Yeah.
And they like wine, I'm going to say, much more than we do. We like it and they love it. When we're at this festival, and one of the things you could do at this festival was take a wine tasting class.
Oh yeah.
Learn how to taste your wine. So you had your glass and
they put some in it.
This was red wine, so you could see it better. And they're like, now, and the guy's up there talking. He's just talking and talking, and he's swirling and he's swirling.
You have to swirl the wine in your glass to release the bouquet.
And he's talking and he's giving the history, and then he puts it down. And
he's
then
he's
talking, and then he pulls it up and he swirls some more, and
letting it breathe.
He puts it down. Meantime, my friend Lisa, she's been through 3 glasses of wine already.
You try to look at the legs.
Well, there's legs on this.
And he's just explaining the whole thing. And 3 minutes later, he says, okay, now take a sip. And then he talks about the process of what you do when you sip. But yeah, Lisa's wine,
it was
down.
Gone.
And she's like, what? Take a sip? My wine's been gone for minutes.
It was the funniest thing.
So they come and they pour the next wine.
To do the exact
and
same
we're like,
thing
Lisa,
again.
You're supposed to swirl.
She couldn't do it. She couldn't do it.
She could never. I think we tasted 3 different wines through that whole lesson. And each time she was like, I can't make it. I just can't make it.
So that's a good memory of mine. Another one was when we went to the vintner who was in the restaurant business, and he was a sommelier, and he worked for Gordon Ramsay at one of his restaurants, and he spoke excellent English, of course.
Sure.
And so we just happened into his little place, as we do. And the first thing he tells us that he used to be a sommelier for Gordon Ramsay, and that, yes, all the rumors are true. He's just as mean as you think he is.
Everything you've seen on TV, plus.
But we didn't talk about that for long, because then he gets into his own wine story, which was just hilarious. The way he decided that he was going to buy a vineyard and what he was going to do. And the terroir, that's where we learned a little bit more about what a terroir was, which is basically the
soil
microculture in the soil that, that it's grown in a lot of limestone, a lot of, whatever.
Shale, who knows?
Shale,
Granite.
whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so he's going on, and he's talking, and we're having a good old time, and we're just tasting wines. And he goes, and this one right here. Oh, it's my favorite wine to drink, after I've gone for a little jog. I'll never forget that line. I mean, who the hell?
Who drinks wine after a jog? Well, we know now.
Yeah, he does.
We don't. There might be others.
No, now we just walk in vineyards and drink lots of wine and maybe stumble home. But that's like I said, do that.
So one of the last wine tastings we did, I think, was a really good story as well. We ended up spending a good hour and a half there.
So
just
long.
Talking, telling stories, having fun with the other customers that had come in.
Who lived down the street, basically in the next town over. So they were French. They were from the area.
They had a bottle of wine at lunch from this vintner, and they said, oh, that we really like this. Let's go buy some, just like what we would do.
And we were like, hey, we do that.
But that was a really good experience. It started out a little strange at first. We weren't planning on doing a wine tasting.
Had no intention.
We were just driving the Route de Vin in Alsace, and our goal was to drive the whole thing over the course of a couple of days. Well, we got to the first village at the start of the route.
In the afternoon.
Totally sidetracked at this wine tasting.
Yeah.
We went to take a picture of this beautiful wooden wine harvesting wagon that was parked in front of what we thought was the domain. It turned out it was just the house of the family that owned the domain. And the daughter drove by while we were taking the picture. And so we were like, well, maybe we should go in. So we walk in to see if we could do a wine tasting. And she says,
as you do,
you can, but not here. This is our house. You have to go. And she gives us very perfect directions on how to get to the winery where we can taste wine. And at this point, we're like, well, we weren't really planning on doing that. So maybe we'll just hit the road. But no, she stood there and watched us as we drove out and made all the turns to get to the winery. So we went right to the winery.
She actually followed us there to make sure we made it.
She did later, yeah. Had the best time talking to her brother, Christoph, who is now the manager and the head vintner, I guess.
14th generation.
14th generation. This place has been there.
Amazing.
All kinds of great stories. I think we talked about this during another podcast. One of the things they have there is a bottle of wine that was taken from the winery during World War I and ended up in a Berlin basement. Grandson later finds it, brings the bottle back to them, and now they've got it on display in their cave.
So cool.
Super cool story.
Super cool. But I mean, he was full of stories. He told us about his great-great-grandfather and how he started this one varietal that they are famous for, and that was a rosé, which Jim and I are not really big into rosés.
Pinot Noir and rosé. Not a blend.
Not a blend, a Pinot Noir. And it was just really fascinating stuff. So everything he did, from his upbringing to how he runs the business now to, just cute little things that happen throughout their history as a winery. It was just fascinating. He took us for a real good tour of his cave, and we learned about what a clay is, a key, and basically
holds the door on.
It's the key that holds the barrel door on, and the ones that he had in his cave were
beautiful, hand carved, wooden, really amazing,
just gorgeous.
He's like, yes, those are not that old. They're only 50 or 60 years old. We bought those when we were millionaires.
Yeah.
When the wine business was really good, apparently. I don't think it's bad now, but apparently they had quite the heyday in the 60s.
But that was really fun. Another one, other times we've just walked in and we've always had cute little conversations with people. Very few times. I mean, of course, we've run the gamut because every single experience is different. But sometimes you walk in and they're a little busy and they don't really have time for you, and they still want to serve to you and they're still nice, but they'll
still do the whole process with you and explain the wine. They will never short the time on talking about the wine, but you may or may not, depending on how busy they are, get like more personal stories, family stories about the winery itself, things like that. But no matter what, even the really busy ones, they've been pleasant and friendly and welcoming. And I think that's like the thing to take away from it is as intimidating as it may seem to walk in blind
with no one there. There's no one there.
And not even see anybody there and ring a button or push a button to ring a bell.
Most of the time you don't ring a bell.
You just walk around and they find you. Yeah.
Yeah, you just show up there.
And that's going to turn into...
And it's not deserted all of a sudden. Someone's there and they're coming to help you.
And that's going to turn into like one of the coolest experiences that you can have.
And it doesn't really matter where you are in France. As long as it's a wine growing region, you can have that experience. So
I say do it.
I say do it. Asante. Enjoy.
Don't drink and drive.
Enjoy the wine.
Drink responsibly and enjoy the wine. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Streets and Eats. If you liked what you heard, please show us some love, hit the like button, and leave us a review. Maybe even subscribe so you don't miss any future podcasts. Also, we'd love it if you joined us on our Facebook private group, Streets and Eats, where we just have an ongoing conversation about all things travel. Ciao for now.